In 2001, the movies Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter debuted, and Apple launched the first iPod. Meanwhile, in the world of wrestling, the Attitude Era kept moving forward. And with Extreme Championship Wrestling and World Championship Wrestling closing their doors forever, WWE would finally win the Monday Night War. That would create a new story in the ring. Shout out to Supermaster Ball 1987 for your comment. Remember to comment and you could appear in upcoming videos. Remember, whatever happens, like the video. Last year, Karangu was WWE Champion. Both Steve Austin and The Rock were competing to see who was the real face of the company. And in other parts of the wrestling world, World Championship Wrestling and Extreme Championship Wrestling were taking their last breaths. Meanwhile, in WWE, the Royal Rumble would take place on January 21, and everything was going smoothly. That night, 2 titles changed hands, including Chris Jericho defeating Benoit for the Intercontinental Championship in a great match. The Dudley Boys beat Edge and Christian to win the tag team titles. But not all were title changes, as after this, Ivory retained her women's championship against China when the 9th wonder of the world suffered a kayfabe neck injury. All before Angle managed to overcome Triple H when Steve Austin interfered to snatch the victory from his ongoing rival. All of that was just the prelude to the main event. Since in the Rumble match, possibly the best Rumble in all of history, Kane would dominate at the beginning, taking out several opponents. As the match continued, The Rock, Undertaker, and Rikishi got involved, making things much more exciting. In the end, when all was said and done, Stone Cold claimed victory for the 3rd time, setting a record after eliminating Kane and securing his spot in WrestleMania's main event. Even though Kurt Angle still had the gold, there was another event before he reached the showcase of the Immortals, and as such, he would be forced to face another challenger, and unfortunately for him, his challenger at No Way Out on February 25 would turn out to be none other than The Rock. Of course, that wouldn't be the only big match that would take place at this show. Before that, Stephanie McMahon would take revenge on her father's new lover, Trish Stratus, continuing the McMahon Civil War storyline. A story that had already seen Vince repeatedly turn to his comatose wife, Linda, with his affairs. After that, Triple H and Steve Austin would settle their issues in a 3 stages of hell match. The first fall, a singles match, was won by the Rattlesnake, while the second, a street fight, was won by the Game. In a steel cage match, both men would destroy each other. It ended with the heel knocking out Austin with a sledgehammer and then falling on him to get the 3 count. Winner or not, Cole still had his WrestleMania World Title match. What are you waiting for? His opponent would finally be decided. When in the main event, The Rock ended Kurt Angle's 4-month reign as champion, everything was set for April 1st. Arguably the industry's 2 biggest stars going head to head to determine the true leader. But this wasn't the only reason many consider WrestleMania 17 the greatest event ever. Because besides having the perfect main event, the rest of the card was absolutely incredible. Many see this as the end of the Attitude Era, and if it had to end, this was the place. It was an incredible era because practically everyone and everything that made that period so special was represented here, coming together to create a truly magical night. And as for how it started, at the beginning we would see 4 title changes. Chris Jericho would defeat William Regal for the title. Interesting. Kane captured the Hardcore title in a triple threat match. Eddie Guerrero beat Test for the European Championship, and China got revenge on Ivory by winning the women's title. But that wasn't even half of what made this show great, because after that, Krangle and Chris Benoit had a wrestling classic. The Hardy Boys, Dudley Boys, and Edge and Christian elevated the event with the second TLC match. A fun battle royal of characters would see some names from the past return, and The Undertaker would continue his streak after defeating Triple H in an excellent match. Then the McMahon family drama would continue when, defending his mother's honor, Shane would face and ultimately defeat his father, Vince. All with a little help from Linda and also from Trish Stratus, who would turn face during the match after getting fed up with the boss's misogynistic ways. But this match was about more than just the McMahons, of course, because only 6 days before the show on Raw, it had been announced that Vince McMahon had bought World Championship Wrestling, officially ending the Monday Night Wars. So what was coming next was a main event that would decide not only who would be the face of the company, but also the WWE Champion going forward. After just over 28 minutes, the Rattlesnake finally emerged victorious. Although to do this, he would surprise the fans when, with the help of a chair, he would turn heel and align himself with the evil boss McMahon. Yes, nobody wanted to see the two former rivals, once bitter enemies, shaking hands. And as a result of this, with the people's hero betraying them, many simply stopped watching WWE in the following weeks. It also didn't help that the following night on Raw, La Roca was also taken off television for a while to go film the Scorpion King, leaving the company without a main face. But what about Triple H? He would align himself with Austin, forming the team two-man power trip, and this would lead to Backlash on April 29. Where instead of seeing Austin, who had just turned heel, defend his title in a singles match, the fans would see him team up with Triple H to face the Brothers of Destruction, with the villains winning this match to also become the tag team champions. Still, it's not like no one was interested in WWE anymore, because when they went to the United Kingdom for Insurrection just a few days later on May 5th, the company would draw an incredible crowd, a crowd that was more than happy to see Undertaker defeat the two-man power trip in a handicap match. That wouldn't be the last problem for the villain champions either. When would they return to America? From then on, it would soon be time for Judgment Day on May 20th, where it would now be Austin versus Undertaker, one-on-one for the title. But that was that night, since before the main event, Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit would settle their issues in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Chyna would defend her women's title against Lita in what turned out to be her last match with the company, and Kane would pin Triple H to win the Intercontinental title that the Game had recently taken from Chris Jericho a few weeks earlier. Still, even if the two-man power trip had lost the secondary title, at least in the main event, Austin could defeat the Deadman, allowing them to keep the title in their hands. Plus, they still held the tag team titles, which they would defend against Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit the next night on Raw in one of that show's best matches. The babyface wrestlers would be crowned new champions at the end of that match. What most people remember now is that it was the match where Triple H tore his quadriceps, which forced him to be out of action for the rest of the year. The injuries wouldn't end there, because just a month later, at King of the Ring on June 24, Steve Austin would also be temporarily sidelined, when during his successful title defense in the main event, Booker T got involved and slammed the Rattlesnake onto the announcer's table at ringside. Yes, this was one of the first moments of the invasion, something that had formally begun a few weeks earlier, on the May 28 episode of Raw, when Lance Storm interfered in a match between Steve Blackman and Perry Saturn. And he wasn't the only one who showed up before King of the Ring, because in the June episode, he appeared as the stalker of The Undertaker's wife, Sarah. But they wouldn't face each other yet, because at the King of the Ring event, it would be Shane McMahon himself who would raise the World Championship Wrestling flag when he had an absolutely brutal street fight against Kurt Angle. All this happened before the Olympic hero made it to the King of the Ring final, where he eventually lost to Edge, and now as the new King of the Ring. Looking ahead, Edge would find himself fully representing Team WWE, as in the following weeks the invasion would start to pick up speed. But how would all this happen? Well, with World Championship Wrestling trying to take over Raw and turn it into Nitro. Something that the fans were forced to know was when Booker T and Buff Bagwell headlined the main event of the July 2 episode of Raw. WWE fans would reject this match, which would lead Vince McMahon to decide to scrap this whole storyline and instead have World Championship Wrestling not try to take over Raw, but instead they would just be an outside invading force. Even if this seemed like a surefire concept, it quickly became clear to fans. Except for Booker T and Diamond Dallas Page, none of the major stars from the rival company would appear. And the reason for this was that with the guaranteed contracts from Time Warner, the boss wasn't willing to buy them out after all the money he had already spent. In the Extreme Football League, we wouldn't see figures like the New World Order, Bill Goldberg, Sting, Ric Flair, or even Eric Bischoff show up to defend the Invaders in the short term. Instead, we would mostly get mid to lower card wrestlers like Chuck Palumbo, Kidman, or Shawn Stasiak, which left fans all over the world feeling a bit disappointed then, realizing that they needed to do something to inject new life into this whole angle. WWE would bring insane championship wrestling into the game, having Rob Van Dam and Tommy Dreamer join the Dudley Boys. Rhino, Taz, Raven, Lance Storm, Just Incredible, and Mike Awesome to revive the hardcore promotion on the July 9th episode of Raw. And if that wasn't enough, later that same night, Insane Championship Wrestling would join forces with World Championship Wrestling to create the alliance with Stephanie McMahon, being introduced as the new Extreme Boss. From then on, yes. By that time, the audience was starting to realize that everything was turning into another McMahon family drama angle. But even that didn't stop the audience from tuning in en masse for the next event called Invasion, which took place on July 22, a show that would make it happen. Record sales, and what were the fans who bought the event treated to that night? Well, a pretty good show. That night, we saw Billy Kidman beat Spag, Rob Van Dam defeat Jeff Hardy, and Trish Stratus and Lita win against Stacy Kibler and Tori Wilson. After that, the main event would feature a 10-man elimination match between Team Alliance versus Team WWE with Booker T, Diamond Dallas Page Rhino, and the Dudley. While on the other side were Chris Jericho, Kane, The Undertaker, and Kurt Angle, joining the old Stone Cold Steve Austin after spending weeks trying to convince their main star to go back to his old tough guy ways. Once again, Vince McMahon and the fans would finally get their wish, when, on the Raw before this show, the Rattlesnake practically took out the invading force by himself, apparently confirming his return to the good side. Of course, that wouldn't last long, as by the end of the main event, Austin would have turned heel once again and joined the Alliance, letting down fans again. And what made this even worse was that it didn't make sense for Stone Cold to want to go back to the company that had once fired him. So it was lucky then that not long after this, The Rock made his return to WWE. He sided with his hometown team from that moment on and thus became the captain of the team. And at the very least, this would inject some excitement into the Invasion storyline, since at the next event, SummerSlam, on August 19, The Rock would get a victory for Team WWE when in the main event he pinned Booker T, thus becoming the new World Championship Wrestling World Champion. Of course, with Steve Austin successfully defending his WWE World title against Kurt Angle that same night. This meant that each side now had the other's most prized possession going forward, but that wasn't the only big news of the night. Of course, because on the undercard, more titles would change hands when Edge defeated Lance Storm to bring the Intercontinental title back home. Rob Van Dam beat Jeff Hardy in a ladder match to win the Hardcore title. And the Cruiserweight and Light Heavyweight champions would be unified when SPAC, the only villain on Team WWE at that time, defeated Tajiri. That despite the fact that this show turned out to be a success. The Invasion story gained perspective when weeks later, the New York attacks affected the world. So, changing course and deciding to give American fans a moment they could relate to. Vince McMahon scheduled Karangal's rematch with Steve Austin for Unforgiven on September 23rd, after the Olympic hero finally defeats his rival to become WWE Champion. But that wasn't the only title change that happened that night, because before the main event, Rhino would become the World Championship Wrestling United States Champion, after defeating Tajiri and Christian, who had only recently betrayed Edge and joined the Alliance, would overcome his now former teammate by taking the Intercontinental title from him on the October 8 episode of Raw. Steve Austin would even regain the WWE title from Kurt Angle, ending his brief reign and putting the company back on its original plans after that little detour. However, one thing that wasn't so hard to follow was the fact that while the alliance was generally struggling to seem like a threat, at best, one man on the roster was managing to rise through the ranks as the next big star in waiting, and that was Rob Van Dam. That's why at No Mercy on October 22, Rob Van Dam would go for the WWE title, facing Stone Cold and Kurt Angle in a triple threat match. And even though he didn't win, this match would help elevate him to the next level, making him one of the few bright spots in the entire Invasion storyline. But he wasn't the only one stepping up on this show, as in the previous match. Chris Jericho would surprise the wrestling world when, as part of his internal rivalry in WWE with The Rock, he would face off against the World Championship Wrestling, finally pinning him after a little over 23 minutes to take the belt home. Unfortunately, feeling that it had all been largely a failure, Vince McMahon decided it was time to pull the plug on everything. And that's why, after one more stop in the United Kingdom for Rebellion on November 3rd, WWE and the Alliance would agree to a match, where the winner takes all at Survivor Series, with the losing side being forced to disband forever. But if he thought he had all his soldiers ready for this, he was very wrong. Just weeks before the match, Krangle also switched sides and joined the enemy. We go to November 18th, where before the main event, Edge defeated Tess. To unify the Intercontinental and United States Championships, the Dudley Boys pinned the Cardi Boys to merge both companies' tag team titles. Trish Stratus would win a challenge to become the first women's champion after Chyna. The main event would see Team Alliance, made up of Stone Cold, Krangle, Booker T, RBD, and Shane McMahon, face Team WWE, made up of The Rock, Chris Jericho, The Undertaker, Kane, El Big Show. Of course, this highlighted the big problem with the Invasion storyline. By then, since during this final battle, only a single original World Championship Wrestling wrestler was in the championship. King Dudley was left without the Dudley Boys. Edge was left in the final championship. The King didn't win the championship. The King of the Dudley Boys lost the championship. King Dudley Edge was left without. Dudley was left without winning the final championship. King Dudley Boys was left without winning the final championship. King of Dudley wins from Raw. Ric Flair would come out the next night after World Championship Wrestling officially died to announce that he had bought shares in WWE before the match, with the result that he was now co-owner of the company, 50-50 with Vince McMahon. And all of that would lead to the final show of the year, where with only one company left standing, it was decided that there should also be only one world champion in the future. So at the Vengeance event on December 9, they opened a one-night tournament with Steve Austin, The Rock, Jericho, and Kurt Angle, and the winner would be crowned as the first undisputed champion in history. Before that happened, Jeff and Matt Hardy would face each other in a sibling rivalry match. The Dudley Boys, now joined by Stacy Keibler, would defend their tag team titles against Big Show and Kane. The Undertaker would pin Rob Van Dam to become the new hardcore champion, and Trish Stratus would successfully defend her women's title against Jacqueline. Then, in the WWE World title match, Steve Austin would get the 3 count over Kurt Angle. This would be immediately followed by Chris Jericho scoring a surprise victory over The Rock in the World Championship Wrestling World title match. And with that, it would come down to Austin versus Jericho to see who would be the undisputed champion. A match where the Rattlesnakes seemed to have World Championship Wrestling under control several times. It would end with interference from Booker T, which led Chris Jericho to get the victory, putting him in the history books forever as the first man to unify the WWE and World Championship Wrestling World titles, and for having defeated The Rock and Stone Cold in the same night. After that, Austin would move on to a rivalry with Booker T, which saw the two have a very memorable match. In a supermarket, all while Jericho was trying, Booker would try to establish himself as the leader of the company, facing his first challenger. But that's a story for another day, because 2001 is starting to come to an end. The following year, Vince McMahon's company would get into a new legal controversy that would seek to have its name changed. We'll see each other in 2002.